Lights, camera, action.
Ladies and gentlemen, on The Detail today, the state of our film and television industry. Can it survive? How do we keep the lights on, the cameras rolling and action going?
It's the end of the news as we know it. In a meeting with staff this morning, Three's owners, Warner Brothers Discovery, confirmed the closure of our news service, News Hub.
New Zealand is risking the death of an award-winning industry. Veterans of our screen production sector say New Zealand is being left behind, with other countries winning over Hollywood business because of generous rebate schemes.
Fair Go, the longest-running TV consumer program in New Zealand, flagship current affairs show Sunday and late news bulletin Tonight are all facing an uncertain future.
We're eradicating in the next few weeks some of the biggest TV shows that we make in New Zealand about New Zealand.
We can't save everyone. Hey, don't do this.
Shortland Street, tonight on 2 and TVNZ Plus.
So we will look at the shake-up that's needed to get our film and television industry back on track to restore some sort of glory, and what the government is planning to make this happen. Today's star, the Media Insider.
So Shane Curry, Editor-at-Large of NZME and the New Zealand Herald.
Talk us through, Shane, the current state of our film and TV industry right now. Where are we sitting? Just how bad is it?
Well, it's a really good question, Amanda. The film and TV sector hasn't had, I guess, as much publicity as the journalistic media sector in the last 12 months, but the production sector is on its knees. There's been about between $50 and $60 million pulled out of that sector in terms of production in the last 12 months, and that's a result of the dropping advertising revenue, audiences transitioning to new platforms. And so we've seen a lot of producers out of work, a lot of film operators, camera operators, and so forth. And so much like our newsrooms, the film and TV sector is on its knees. We've seen that in terms of for audiences. Shortland Street's come down to 3 days a week instead of 5. You know, TVNZ's cut back on the production costs there. They've had to rely on the screen production rebate in order for that show to survive. And we're seeing that replicated across the industry.
So what is the government doing? Talk me through the sort of media reform discussion that's been revealed. What are they proposing? Yeah,
so this is actually the third tranche, I guess, of legislation that Paul Goldsmith has introduced since he's become minister in a short time. And it's a little bit messy. So this latest media reforms package pulls together 5 key strands, which hasn't already been picked up. Some of them are related, some of them aren't.
In a nutshell, those 5 strands are mandating that smart TVs and similar devices sold in New Zealand come pre-installed with local media service apps such as TVNZ Plus and 3Now. These apps should be prominently displayed.
TVNZ On Demand, ready when you are.
So stream free now with 3Now.
Increasing investment into and discoverability of local content, increasing captioning and audio description, modernising professional media regulation, and merging NZ On Air and the New Zealand Film Commission into a single entity.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.
The big one really is the requirement on global streamers and other television companies to place a percentage of their revenue, and they haven't said exactly how high that revenue should be or what that percentage is, into local production. And so it's a discussion paper at the moment. There'll certainly be a lot of feedback over the coming weeks, I'm sure, from the Netflixes and Disneys of the world. But basically it's the first time that New Zealand has placed a requirement on the global streamers in particular that they have to invest back into our local production community and into our sector. And that's basically partly because the audiences are now transitioning a lot towards them, but there really is no reinvestment back into the New Zealand industry. And so, we've seen lots of cutbacks, and it really is on its knees. We do need to, in the view of the government and of the likes of Sparta, we need to see investment back from the global streamers in particular.
We do need something, but after the paper was released, has there been any impact or any response from the international streamers?
The international streamers are notorious, a bit like Google and Facebook. They're kind of faceless in a way in New Zealand, and no, we haven't. We haven't got any reaction whatsoever. They'll no doubt be pulling something together, but they are playing their cards close to their chest. Having said that, Sparta itself has said, they are absolutely supportive of what the government's proposing, but they're also suggesting that a levy might work or a quota. So they're keeping their kind of options open for the discussion that will unfold in the coming weeks as well. Sparta represents, of course, the producers of the country and the film industry, and so they'll play a key role, and the government will be listening closely.
But what happens if the international streamers don't play ball, if they don't invest in local content?
The discussion paper doesn't actually cover what the penalties might be, but I guess because it will be legislatively required by all accounts, it's basically going to be a legal requirement for them to do so. But the really interesting thing here, Amanda, is the bigger picture, and that is this is being couched as a discussion. The government's been so careful in terms of its wording around this whole project, and that's basically because Donald Trump is threatening any international government with tariffs or penalties if they clamp down on American companies in their own territories.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt.
For instance, we're seeing in Australia already, they're starting to back down on the equivalent of their fair digital news bargaining bill over there, worried that tariffs will come in. So Trump's been very strong on this. And I know that the Prime Minister's office, my sources say, was particularly nervous about this document being released in the last week. And you'll notice that the Minister himself, Paul Goldsmith, has done the introduction. He's couched it as a discussion. Certainly, with submissions closing in just 6 weeks' time, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will see any legislative change. And I think that's probably a worry in the background for the production industry.
Anything from Trumpland over this? Too early days at the moment? Too
early days at the moment. Interestingly, in Australia, their ambassador in Washington, Kevin Rudd's now having to play a very careful line and talking to the US administration about the fair digital news, the equivalent of in Australia, and insisting that it's not quite the terrible legislative piece that Facebook, Meta, if you like, and Google are making it out to be. So there will need to be some very careful trade negotiations and diplomatic discussions in light of this paper being released. I'm sure our own ambassador will be doing that.
Look, I'm a big fan of Prime Amazon. I'm a big fan of watching Netflix at night. At the moment, how prominent or not are New Zealand-made shows? What are they now? What does the government want them to be?
When the media reforms paper was released, I dialed up Netflix and I actually had to search for New Zealand movies and TVs, and to give Netflix its credit, it does actually have a subcategory, New Zealand movies and TV. Unfortunately, last week there were 9. And that included movies such as Whale Rider, Once Were Warriors.
A long time ago, my ancestor Paikea came to this place on the back of a whale.
Our people once were warriors.
You know, these movies have been around for decades. Today, when I called up just before our interview, there were 10. So they've added another one. And so, you know, that's very small numbers compared to the thousands of titles on offer. I think Canada, I looked at the Canadian TV and movies, they had about 120, and Australia had 200. So New Zealand really does suffer in terms of its own content that's in the mix on Netflix. Unless it's a new show, it's very difficult to find.
Do you have concerns, though, Shane, that these regulations could push some platforms to leave the New Zealand market?
No, I don't think so. I think Netflix is very strong in New Zealand in terms of its infiltration in the market. It won't be a lucrative market for them by any stretch. We're at the bottom of the world, of course, but it will be handy. And they'll never want to exit a market, I'm sure, that does bring them in a profit margin and so forth. Look, Netflix in its own way is trying to build up its audiences in other categories and other territories around the world, and we've seen with the likes of NFL, they've started broadcasting live sport with some quite frankly strange boxing events featuring Mike Tyson.
This is the fight the world's been waiting for. What happens next? Only one way to know. Paul versus Tyson, Friday, November 15th, live on Netflix.
Let's face it, we all watched it though.
We did. Well, I did. And they've introduced WWE, the wrestling. And so they are absolutely trying to build up their audience base in other respects as well. And they'll be trying to do the same in New Zealand. And of course, right now we have the rugby TV rights up for offer. Now, that's particularly big in New Zealand. I don't expect Netflix itself to be strongly contesting those against the likes of Sky TV. But I do think some of the smaller streamers might be taking some interest, such as DAZN, which is a British-based company which is fast moving into the sports territory. So there's lots of manoeuvring at the moment in the streaming world, and we'll see that play out in the next 12 months in New Zealand.
Have you spoken to production houses? Are they excited? Is this like, finally they're going to get some recognition? This is going to give them hope?
Absolutely. They've been waiting for this for years. They know, they've had to lay off people as much as the newsrooms and the media companies around the country. And so they know the likes of South Pacific Pictures, Greenstone, Great Southern Television. These are great production houses who produce incredible content. And they just need a leg up, or at least an even playing field, to ensure that their content remains. It's all about our New Zealand identity and making sure that we can see New Zealand on air, if you like, and reflecting our identity back to us.
It's been a blockbuster summer for New Zealand's film industry, with shooting underway on some big budget productions.
From Lord of the Rings to King Kong, Avatar, and the Hobbit trilogy.
When Hollywood came to Piha recently, this camping ground went from tents and birds to a bustling movie set.
And the thing is, we do damn fine movies, docos. We are on a world-class playing field there.
Absolutely. I mean, you only need to see, obviously with the screen production rebate, a lot of international productions come here, but they are funded and largely staffed by international crews and so forth.
Hollywood superstar Brad Pitt has arrived in New Zealand to begin work on his latest action-packed blockbuster, Heart of the Beast.
Well, Hollywood has come to Oamaru, with the small South Island town transformed into 1800s California. The Netflix series East of Eden is an adaptation of John Steinbeck's 1952 novel, and filming is now underway in Oamaru's Victorian precinct.
Still helps the New Zealand crews, though. Locals are employed. But absolutely, we are world-class, Amanda. I mean, there's examples of that every day. And I was going through the Greenstone and the South Pacific Pictures and Great Southern Television menus just last week, and, it sort of sends a shiver down the spine in terms of some of the great quality content that we've had over the years.
I love that. Now, also part of this discussion paper, New Zealand On Air and the New Zealand Film Commission will be merged. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, the media industry in New Zealand hasn't had a great run of proposed mergers in the last decade, that's for sure, both privately and in the public sector. And of course, the most recent example of that was TVNZ RNZ.
Well, the one policy most definitely did and done, even though it's cost us $16 million collectively so far. The merger of Television New Zealand and Radio New Zealand.
Well, after almost a year of hearing submissions and deliberation and plenty of lobbying, the Commerce Commission has turned down the proposed merger of the country's two biggest media companies. The Commerce Commission says the proposed merger between Fairfax New Zealand and NZME is not in the public interest.
But this one, to me, is a no-brainer, and it shouldn't have any of the hurdles that we saw last time, at least with the TVNZ RNZ merger. And the reason being that movies now, so New Zealand Film, just to backtrack a little bit, the Film Commission funds largely film and movies, and New Zealand On Air tends to focus more on the traditional TV sector. Now, of course, that's all coming together in digital convergence. We're watching movies on our smartphones, but also at home. Some of the movies that are now released at cinema are also being released at the same time on Apple TV. So the thinking behind merging the two funding agencies, New Zealand On Air and the New Zealand Film Commission, is that there's a cohesive approach that a producer or a production company can go straight to this one funding entity and talk to them about a distribution, whether that's in cinema and or straight to a streamer and or a local platform such as TVNZ.
Look, we're funded by New Zealand On Air. How will it impact funding distribution?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because the discussion paper goes into this in quite some depth, or at least a regulatory impact paper which is attached to the discussion paper. And I looked at this quite closely last week because you're right, at the moment $66 million of RNZ funding comes through New Zealand On Air. Now, the discussion paper leaves that open for debate in coming years. One option that they've floated is that platform funding, as they call it, for RNZ comes out from under New Zealand On Air and is either handled by, say, the Ministry of Culture and Heritage or even Treasury. Now, as I said in my column last week, that might have some people reaching for the smelling salts to think Treasury might handle RNZ's funding all of a sudden. But generally speaking, it is ring-fenced, and the Minister of the day will always, or the Cabinet will always decide on RNZ's level of funding. So in a way, New Zealand On Air is a pass-through kind of agency. But having said that, New Zealand On Air does focus on content. I think it's important that at least a media agency is overseeing RNZ and TVNZ rather than perhaps the accountants. But that's certainly up for debate. And of course, RNZ has had a funding boost from in the last 2 years from both the outgoing Labour government, and that was reinforced by Paul Goldsmith under National last year.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.
There'll be such demand, I think, and even in the last round with New Zealand On Air funding. How important is it that they get that right because of the need for it so badly in our industry?
Yeah, there is a lot of pressure on New Zealand On Air, and they get oversubscribed big time in terms of the applications for funding. So I don't envy the likes of Cameron Harland and his funding team in terms of the decisions they have to make. But I think what it has done, Amanda, it's brought together the industry, New Zealand media industry, in a lot of ways. We're seeing a lot more collaboration between some of the big media companies. RNZ shares all its content now with, I think, I was reading Paul Thompson, the CEO, was saying now something like 60 partnerships. We have our own partnerships at NZME with others. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that, of the industry working together. I think more can be done in that space. And certainly, that's critical for New Zealand On Air when it comes to its own funding decisions. It doesn't want to be just funding one kind of media company alone. It wants to know that content is being distributed far and wide and it's getting as many eyeballs or ears as possible.
Will there be, do you think, job losses or efficiency gains from streamlining these entities? Yeah,
that's certainly the indication. Now, these are not massive agencies in their own right, so the job losses won't be big. It won't be in the hundreds at all because they don't have that many people. But certainly there will be some backroom, duties and tasks that clearly the efficiencies will be there to be gained. But that's not the key driver for this. I certainly see a much more cohesive approach to being able to fund brilliant movies, brilliant series of TV productions and so forth. And so that really is the key driver, that we bring it all together, much like Australia has done with Screen Australia.
It's 3Now, the place for entertainment.
Watch us anywhere, anytime. Make Māori Plus your mate and stream now.
The merger, though, will it affect independent and, say, Māori media producers?
Well, interesting enough, they've ring-fenced Mangai Pāho and the funding agency that has been set up separately under the Broadcasting Act. That was an amendment after several years of the Broadcasting Act being enforced. So Te Mangai Pāho will remain in place, but that doesn't prevent independent production companies still going to the new agency as well. So there will be kind of still, rather than 3, I guess, revenue streams, the ability to go to 2.
The broadcasting standards regime may also be revised as part of the government's proposal.
So part of the 5 strands was a new regulator overall. Now, that new regulator would cover who the Broadcasting Standards Authority currently looks after, mainly the television networks, but also radio. At the moment, the digital news websites and newspapers are covered by the Media Council. That's a self-regulatory body. So basically, the government is saying that we want one regulatory body to come in to oversee the entire industry. Right now, they've ring-fenced social media away from that, which I think is a mistake. I think Facebook/Meta needs to be incorporated into some of these standards. You only need to see some of the rubbish that comes across your news feed, your so-called news feed on Facebook at the moment, to understand that there needs to be some sort of regulatory oversight, or stronger regulatory oversight of what is distributed. There's some really dangerous fake information that the social media platforms are distributing. Having said that, I do think it's important that there is more consistency in terms of a regulatory body. The Media Council would stay in place. This regulatory body would basically be a backstop for any complaints that weren't resolved to the satisfaction of either the complainant or the media platform.
Shane, how will regulations ensure that local media platforms remain prominent on, say, smart TVs and devices?
So that's one of the 5 key strands, is that the likes of LG and Samsung, the manufacturers of these smart TVs, will actually be required to place New Zealand apps. That's the likes of TVNZ Plus, Māori Television, Whakaata Māori, and Freeview on prominently on the, I guess, when you turn on the TV, that you see those apps as regularly as you see the Netflixes and the Disney Pluses of the world. So right now, if you turn on a smart television in New Zealand, by and large, you're going to be seeing Netflix pop up rather than a local app. So the requirement will be on them to ensure that technology-wise, the New Zealand apps are just as prominent.
Having seen it, had time to ponder it, are you comfortable with it? Do you think it's going to go ahead? Do you sort of feel like, yes, this is going to be a good thing?
I don't see it being the big seismic change that I know a lot of other commentators have seen it being. I think at the moment we are in a little bit of a messy spot in terms of our media oversight and regulation. As I say, this is part 3 of a 3-part kind of series of different legislation that the government's looking at. Even within the coalition, there's disagreement. ACT doesn't like the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill, but New Zealand First does. And New Zealand First doesn't like the repeal of the Sunday advertising, whereas ACT's fine with that. And so we're seeing this kind of messiness unfolding both at Select Committee, in the public debate and so forth. And so I think, there's no getting around it. These changes have to happen, but it's all at the moment feeling a little piecemeal. And with the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill being on hold, I question where we'll be in 12 months' time, and will we be any further down the track. Certainly I do think that the proposed revenue from global streamers and TV platforms for local productions, that to me, I'm really optimistic that might come through and will help our production sector.
Just doing a little bit of Media Insider crystal ball balling here. Where do you see the film industry, the television industry in, say, 5 years' time, 10 years' time?
Yeah, I'm much more optimistic about the longer-term future, and I think particularly as the economy bounces back in New Zealand. I mean, our filmmakers are renowned globally, and so if the screen production rebate stays in place, I mean, it's a very competitive field internationally. Spain offers incredible rebates, I think probably double ours. Australia the same. And so we are in this kind of very competitive, but our filmmakers, whether you're Peter Jackson or a producer, working a little more independently, they create this brilliant work. And I think there will always be a destination for our filmmakers. Only in the last week, a movie was released here in New Zealand called Heart Eyes.
For the past 2 years, a masked maniac known as the Heart Eyes Killer has stalked,
hunted,
and brutally slain couples on Valentine's Day.
Now, that was filmed, produced in New Zealand with an international cast, admittedly, but with local crews. That brings in employment. The reviews are mixed, I must say, but having said that, it's just one of a number of films that have been produced here and shot here in the last 12 months.
What are Kiwis like at getting behind Kiwis who make movies here? Are we championing them, or do we say, no, we prefer the international streamers instead?
I think, any great content will resonate with people regardless of where it was made. And, Netflix now dubs a lot of movies that are not produced in English. You only need to look at Squid Game to know how popular that was out of South Korea.
Squid Game is not like anything else on television. Think Hunger Games meets Parasite, a gory dystopian thriller on track to be the most watched streaming sensation ever.
And so that opportunity exists for our New Zealand producers to be on equal footing with some of these countries under these proposals. So the likes of a New Zealand production could be as popular, hopefully one day, as a Squid Game in overseas territories.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Shane Curry. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Alex Harmer. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.